Should they fail to pass significant legislation here in the States, it could be as serious and as detrimental as Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement all over again.
Sally, thank you. Well, demonstrations may be continuing in Washington there, but after 5 weeks of protests, Insulate Britain says it's suspending further campaigns until the 25th of October. The climate change activists have blocked roads, causing major disruption to motorways and routes around London, including the M25. They've been demanding the government take meaningful action to insulate the UK's homes. There's a warning that burning biomass will push the government's climate targets further off track. A report by Chatham House and Woodwell Climate Research Centre says treating the burning of woody biomass as green fuel masks the emissions from the harvest of live trees and the decay of roots left in the forest. Wood pellets produced in the US and burned in the UK were responsible for 13 to 16 million tonnes of CO2 emissions in 2019 alone. The biomass industry currently receives tens of millions of pounds in government subsidies. Conservationists are on the hunt for citizen scientists to spot walruses in pictures taken from space. Scientists are hoping to find out how many walruses live in the Arctic by recruiting members of the public to look through thousands of high-resolution satellite images and report any sightings to WWF and the British Antarctic Survey. It's hoped that 500,000 people worldwide will join the Walrus from Space research project. Now, there was much excitement yesterday when Jeff Bezos took the Captain Kirk actor William Shatner closer to space than he'd ever been before. But today, the Amazon and Blue Origin founder was seemingly rebuked by Prince William, who suggested that billionaires should concentrate on saving the Earth rather than space tourism. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
The new age of space tourism has been another giant leap for greenhouse gas pollution. Even the water vapour released by William Shatner's ride with Blue Origin can result in global warming when it's released into the upper atmosphere.
This is nuts!
Virgin Galactic and soon SpaceX release huge amounts of carbon dioxide too, all to give the privileged few a taste of weightlessness and a spectacular view of the planet.
It's an indictment on the efforts we're trying to make, and it undermines us making sacrifices here on Earth to make sure that we mitigate the impact that we're having on the environment, and then rich billionaires are flying out into space for very expensive selfies.
A long-haul air flight typically emits between 1 and 3 tonnes of carbon per passenger. A rocket launch can result in between 200 and 300 tonnes of carbon dioxide, or 50 to 75 tonnes per astronaut. But as well as carbon dioxide, there are sooty particles, chemicals and other polluting gases released into the upper atmosphere where they do more damage. They not only trap heat, but they trigger a chain reaction that ultimately depletes the ozone layer, our protective shield against UV radiation. Not all space missions are equal. You could argue tourism is a little frivolous, but the new space age has brought us a better understanding of our perilous position on Earth. There's the image of our tiny blue marble that gave lift-off to the environmental movement. Many more showing the astonishingly thin band of the atmosphere protecting us from the void of space, and the observations of shrinking Arctic ice that have rung alarm bells.
There's this notion called the overview effect, where people who fly at high altitudes or see the Earth from space really have a sort of changed moment in their lives, where you see the fragility of Earth hanging in the blackness of space. And as we start to see more regular like folks going to space and experiencing this, that it really has the chance to increase our environmental consciousness.
Within the next few months, SpaceX is due to take private astronauts into orbit, needing even more rocket fuel to break free of gravity. These are early days for the space tourism industry, but Virgin Galactic alone is aiming for 400 flights a year. The carbon footprint of billionaires taking the ultimate sightseeing trip is about to go stratospheric. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Do stay with us. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by Professor Dame Julia King, the chair of the Carbon Trust, and Kel Spellman, actor and WWF ambassador. And we're going to be discussing how much of a role space exploration has to play in finding climate solutions and whether Britain is putting trade deals ahead of climate goals. That's all coming up.
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles.
Can you go away?
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
Police have just made their first move and they've gone in firing tear gas.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. There are hundreds of these turbines, but thousands more across Gansu. That's what's left of the North Tunnel, where the North Koreans exploded 5 nuclear warheads. This is a show of strength at a time when China is more fragile than it has been at any time in recent years. Shrapnel from that explosion, so you can see it littered along all the way. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. The train station and the airport, they're both closed. We're not sure about the roads. We've seen reports that they are being blocked by police, so we're going to try and find a way out of Wuhan. After 5 days stranded here, this is deliverance. We help you understand the world with us. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
We don't understand that every lake or a pond is a habitat in itself, which houses frogs, snakes, crabs, turtles, birds, so many different life forms. Human beings directly depend on underground water source. So a lake or a pond is necessary to replenish these groundwater resources.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Now we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Professor Dame Julia King, Baroness Brown of Cambridge, who is chair of the Carbon Trust, and also the actor and WWF ambassador, Kel Spellman. So good to see you both. Thanks for joining us tonight. So first of all, economic growth should be prioritised over environmental protections in future trade deals. That's the line emerging from a leaked document seen by our deputy political editor, as we heard at the top of the programme. Julia, to you first of all on this, the government says nothing to see here. They say this isn't government policy. They're saying it's not been considered by ministers. But what's your reaction to this leaked memo from civil servants?
I think it's very worrying indeed. I mean, we've seen already the removal of the Paris commitment of aiming for 1.5 degrees from the Australia trade deal. We should be using trade deals to encourage others and to pressurize other countries to sign up and deliver on these critical Paris and net zero commitments. And we should also be using them to make sure we're protecting our own industries, because we're expecting these very high environmental standards rightly, and also expecting our own industries to be on track for net zero. We shouldn't be importing goods where people haven't had to meet those standards and indeed meet those sorts of costs.
Kel, what do you think of this? Let me just show you what the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said. He said, in trade agreements, I deal with trade issues. In climate agreements, I deal with climate issues. I mean, some people might say the main priority here is the economy, post-Brexit, post-COVID, and any climate agreements can be made separately.
I'd have to push back on that for me, because I think the more we're learning actually that all these different areas of conversation and deals are actually all intrinsically linked with climate. And I think if we're starting to separate a trade deal and climate deal, it's actually quite ignorant, because, you know, climate affects trade and climate affects money and climate affects movement of goods and climate affects everything. So to actually approach them as two very separate things, for me, makes no sense. And actually, as I think what was written in the document just go to show that actually the economics of the deal and maybe the partnership is putting as a priority above the planet and actually the agreements that are already in place. So it doesn't come as a surprise. And once again, it is incredibly infuriating and disheartening. Just to see these kind of memos, whatever they are, being passed around. It does nothing to show me that they are taking these things seriously.
Yeah, even though the government will say that it's not policy. But Julia, what about this issue that you said about imports from countries that have less stringent environmental standards? Is there some way around that? Is there some way that this country can put some kind of carbon tariff on any of those imports so that companies in this country that are abiding by stricter rules don't lose out?
Well, we know that Europe has been considering border tax adjustments. So, for example, if you're importing steel from a country which is not decarbonising its power system, so their steel industry is getting cheaper electricity or still able to use coal, for example, that steel gets an additional tax put on it sort of as it reaches the border, so that it competes on a level playing field with the costs that industries in Europe or in a country like the UK are having to bear, the costs of supporting the decarbonisation.
And very quickly, Kel, of course, just 2 weeks till COP. Do you think this is a distraction ahead of that?
I don't know if it's a distraction. I think it's actually quite, as Julie kind of said, quite worrying, because there are promises and pledges and commitments that get made at places like COP, and knowing that these sort of letters are going around governments and that maybe these promises that feels like lip service are just that, it doesn't give me much faith that the deals and commitments we might hear come out of COP in the next couple of weeks are going to mean anything. And actually, if you look at the Paris Climate Agreement, it's a case in point. I think all you have to do is dig a little bit into the detail to realise not just the UK, but most countries aren't on track to meet the goals that they have supposedly committed to in a legally binding way. So when you look to see where is the accountability, it's just very frustrating. And again, it just doesn't fill you with much faith of what's going to come out of COP.
OK, let's move on to our second topic, shall we? And Prince William has been fairly withering in his criticism of space tourism in an interview, saying the world's greatest minds should be focused on fixing this planet rather than further exploring space. Has he got a point, Julia?
I'm absolutely with Prince William on this one. I think he's absolutely right. The enormous amount of energy, as we heard earlier in the programme, and the enormous amount of carbon emissions associated with that it takes to get somebody into space just for a quick look at the Earth from space and to feel weightlessness. I mean, I think that's really shocking. And also the amount of money that's being spent that could be spent on helping us with the transition to net zero, or indeed helping us with the crucial restoration of nature that we need to be doing here on our planet. Stop looking at our planet from afar and start making our planet better, as Prince William has been encouraging them to.
But, Kel, don't we learn a lot about our own planet from looking at it from afar? I mean, look at what Tim Peake, our very own astronaut, said. More than 50% of climate data comes from space assets. So can't we learn about the progress that we're making as far as tackling climate change goes from space?
Yeah, I mean, there is a slight argument for that. I would agree. I think, you know, space exploration and space tourism are two very different things. If you're going just from the tourist side of things, Julia's so right. It makes absolutely no sense and it's quite insulting, to be honest with you. The space exploration has definitely afforded us, you know, the chance to look at research like this, and has definitely probably provided some form of technology. But I think given now where we're at a very critical point when it comes to trying to reverse the effects of climate change. And I don't think the solutions are going to be found out in space. In fact, the solutions are right here on Earth. And I think we should be putting time and energy into these now while we are at this crucial point. And maybe further down the line, it can be something that can be revisited. But for now, it just doesn't seem to make much sense. And that feels like more of a distraction, to be honest with you. We're looking beyond the planet rather than looking in, as Julia also said that.
So how do you redirect those funds towards more earthbound priorities, Julia? What's your tip?
Well, I would say there are some crucial things, as Kel mentioned, to do with space. I mean, the satellite monitoring is going to be absolutely critical for us to know whether we're losing more rainforest, whether the commitments countries are making to planting new forest and woodland, whether those forests and woodlands are being maintained in healthy condition. All of those things are going to be helped by satellite technology and satellite monitoring. So there's plenty that space can do, as Tim Peake has said, to help us. So if you want to invest in space, invest in some of these things that are going to help us with the transition, with monitoring the transition, with helping to determine whether carbon offsets are actually real and are actually removing CO2 from the environment.
OK, well, it's a fascinating discussion. Kel, I'm afraid we're out of time, so we can't come back at you. I know you were worried about space junk as well, but we'll revisit that another time. Kel Spellman, thanks very much indeed, and thanks to Dame Julia King. Good to get your thoughts tonight. So we're all out of time, but do stay tuned. Coming up next, we've got Sky News Tonight for you. And the government promises more help for the NHS after latest figures reveal hospital waiting lists have reached record highs. All the latest coming up next. Stay with us.
Cercando as áreas, limpando as áreas e progressivamente avançando com os plantios. Isso daqui é uma sentença de morte para os manguezais.